My name is Julia. I'm worked at Garrison Systems for over 10 years. I gave that company everything. My weekends, my birthdays, my health, and every ounce of my brain power. I was their go-to engineer when things went wrong. I patched disasters. At 2 a.m. I saved client accounts by improvising fixes no one else could. I once flew cross-country with a laptop full of code just to deploy it on site after a system crash nearly cost us a multi-million-dollar client. And I never asked for applause, just fairness, just respect. But I learned the hard way. Loyalty doesn't mean anything when you start making the wrong people uncomfortable. See, I had concerns. Real ones. The security overhaul, Clay Garrison, our visionary CEO, was pushing had massive red flags. It involved collecting client metadata far beyond what was legal or necessary. I raised it professionally. I documented it. I even tried to fix it quietly. But that wasn't what they wanted. Clay wanted silence. He wanted obedience. I gave him neither. Instead, I got branded uncooperative. I was pulled from our biggest federal project just days after I'd sealed an $8 million contract that had taken me 6 months to land. No explanation. My access was suddenly under review. Meetings happened without me. Colleagues stopped CCing me on threads I started. The break room went silent when I walked in. You know the drill. The slow ghosting, like you're rotting. Before you're even gone. Then came the meeting. I'll never forget it. 15 minutes in a glass conference room with Clay and his legal puppet. No thanks for the years. No acknowledgement of what I'd built. Just this line, "Your presence is disruptive to the company culture. We need to evolve, and you don't align with that vision." Just like that. Fired. 1 week after I saved their largest defense client, 1 week after I made them $8 million, I walked out with nothing but a box of tech manuals, my old Dell laptop, and a USB drive. Clay forgot I still had. The same one that held the original architecture I'd designed from scratch, the system they were about to sell for. Billions, pretending it was theirs. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I just smiled and walked out. They thought they ended my career. What they actually did was light the fuse. I didn't leave that building with my head down. I walked out steady, silent, like a fuse burning beneath the surface. There was no dramatic exit, no shouting, no slamming of doors, just the sound of my heels on polished tile and the quiet hum of the USB drive in my pocket, the one with everything they underestimated. I didn't even look back. I moved into a tiny apartment on the edge of downtown, a 1-bedroom with thin walls, creaky floors, and a kitchen barely big enough to boil water. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. No office politics, no fake. Smiles. No condescension thinly veiled as feedback, just me, my laptop, and the kind of silence that stings before it heals. The first few weeks were brutal. I'd spent a decade pouring everything into Garrison Systems, thinking my loyalty meant something. I kept checking my inbox like an idiot, half expecting an apology or someone to speak up. No one did. Not the junior I mentored for 3 years. Not the colleague who used to cry in my office after presentations Clay ripped apart. Not even a "sorry that sucked" message from HR. Just silence. The corporate kind, calculated and cowardly. But somewhere in that quiet, I found clarity. I stopped waiting for someone to recognize my worth and started recognizing it myself. I went back to my original designs, the ones I'd created before Clay and his vultures twisted everything for profit. My code, clean, ethical, secure. I spent hours combing through it, line by line, not to fix it, but to remember who I was before they made me doubt it. One night, I stayed up until 4 a.m. sketching a new infrastructure system, something scalable, transparent, and impenetrable. I looked at that blueprint and realized something wild. I didn't need them. They needed me. They just figured I'd never realize it. And that's the thing no one tells you. When you finally step out of the room where they convinced you you're not enough, you see that they were just scared you'd outgrow them. And I had. The money they dangled, the titles they waved, none of it meant a thing anymore. I had the one thing they couldn't buy or steal: my mind, my ethics, my name clean on every line of code I'd ever written. I started building, quietly, methodically. No fanfare. No social media posts about new beginnings. I didn't need to prove anything to anyone. I just needed to prove to myself that they were wrong, that they had always been wrong. And every hour I poured into that system, I got stronger. Not angry, not bitter, just sharper. Funny how you don't realize how heavy their approval was until you stop carrying it. And once you set it down, you finally have both hands free to build something that's yours. They thought I'd disappear. I know that now. They thought I'd quietly fade, maybe take a low-tier contractor gig or burn out trying to freelance. That's what happens to whistleblowers and difficult women, right? But I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even trying to get revenge. I just wanted to build something they couldn't touch, and this time, on my terms. It started with a call from someone I never expected to hear from again. Elena Marsh. She was once the director of cybersecurity strategy for the Department of Defense, retired early after a political fallout involving, you guessed it, Clay Garrison's lobbying firm. She didn't say much, just that she'd been watching, that she believed in systems built with integrity, and that if I ever wanted to start something that actually mattered, she'd back me. She wired $80,000 into a business account the next morning and never asked for updates. Just one condition: keep your name off it until it speaks for itself. So I did. Noventa Security was born out of a rented WeWork office with 2 desks, 1 cracked monitor, and a server rack I built from parts I'd sourced off Craigslist. There was no press release, no launch party, just encrypted emails, burner phones, and my code. Fast, clean, impossible to breach. I didn't market to civilians or startups. I went straight to the cracks in the system: outdated networks in federal agencies, overburdened hospital systems vulnerable to ransomware, data pipelines duct-taped together by budget cuts and bad vendors. I didn't sell a brand. I sold silence, the kind of security that meant no leaks, no headlines, and no chaos. Contracts came slow at first, then faster. One by one, agencies signed on: Department of Energy, Veterans Affairs, then the CDC. I built custom protocols that stopped 2 major attacks before they even made the news. My systems didn't just hold up. They adapted, evolved. They were alive. And every time I signed a new contract, I thought about Clay, about that conference room, about how he looked at me like I was disposable. Now I was protecting the same government sectors he'd spent years trying to sell snake oil to. But unlike him, I didn't need to plaster my name on it. Power doesn't need applause. It just needs results. By the end of year 2, Noventa was securing the internal infrastructure of 5 major federal institutions. Quietly. Efficiently. Most of my clients didn't even know who was behind it. That was the point. And when someone finally asked, "Why don't you go public? Why hide?" I just smiled and said, "Because when you build something strong enough, it doesn't matter who they think built it. It just works." That's the thing about operating in silence. People forget you're in the room until you own the whole building. The envelope was thick, cream-colored, and embossed with gold. Fancy. Overcompensating, really. I found it in my mail pile between a Department of Energy renewal contract and a coffee subscription box. Inside was a card. The Executive Board of Garrison Systems cordially invites you to our 25th anniversary celebration. Tucked beneath, the calligraphy and forced nostalgia was a handwritten note. Short, smug, and unmistakably Clay. "You're still part of our story. Come home." Home. What a word. The last time I'd stepped into that marble-lined lobby, I left with a cardboard box and a head full of humiliation. Now they were calling it home. I RSVP'd, yes. Not because I wanted to go, but because I had something better than revenge. I had timing. The dinner was at the Langley Estate, an obnoxiously elegant venue with too many forks and not enough soul. I arrived in a black suit, minimalist, clean. No +1, no entourage. Just me and my assistant, Ava, who stayed outside to take a call. I walked into that ballroom like a ghost returning to its crime scene. Clay was holding court, same smug smile, now with a few more grays and a son, Brett, who looked like he was born in a boardroom. The moment they saw me, the mood shifted. Clay stood up, arms wide, that corporate hug energy radiating. Well, Julia Monroe, I'll be damned. You actually came. I smiled. You invited me. We sat. The air at that table was polished and razor sharp. They asked questions that weren't really questions. Bait wrapped in velvet. How had I been? Still freelancing? Ever find a team that could tolerate my independent style? Brett smirked as he sipped wine. Some people build legacies, some just chase shadows. I didn't rise to it. I'd outgrown this room. I was just waiting for my moment. It came 15 minutes into dessert. Ava appeared, moving quietly between servers and linen. She leaned down beside me and said, just loud enough for the table to freeze, Ms. Monroe, the jet's ready. The Tokyo board needs confirmation to file the NATO flight path. You'll need to join the vote in 90 minutes. The sound of silverware stopped. A spoon clattered against porcelain. Clay's eyes narrowed. Jet? I set my napkin down. We use it for international negotiations. Noventa just closed a $950 million defense contract with NATO. Tokyo's the final vote. Dead silence. No coughs. No cutting remarks. Just stillness. Brett blinked. Wait. Noventa is you? I nodded once. It always was. Clay tried to laugh, but it caught in his throat. You're saying you're running a real operation now? I took out my phone, pulled up Bloomberg, and slid it across the table. Front page. Noventa secures NATO infrastructure deal. Founder remains anonymous. Underneath, my photo at a Geneva summit. They stared like they were seeing me for the first time. I stood up, adjusted my jacket. You didn't just underestimate me, I said calmly. You gave me the perfect excuse to build without any of your baggage. Then I nodded to Ava. Tell the pilot we'll proceed as scheduled. And just like that, I walked out, this time through the front door. I thought closing the NATO deal would be the finish line, the exclamation mark at the end of a long, bitter sentence. But funny thing about success, it doesn't quiet the fire. If anything, it just gives it a better engine. After Tokyo, after that dinner where Clay and his legacy choked on their own smugness, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt unfinished. I kept building Noventa, yes. But my mind was pulled elsewhere. To the nights I spent in that shoebox apartment with takeout containers and code. To the silence no one saw me working in. To the nights I cried in private and patched systems in public. And I kept thinking, how many other women were out there doing the same thing, grinding, bleeding brilliance, only to be told they're too much, too loud, too independent? That's when I opened Project Ember, a technical mentorship and bootcamp program for women in tech, with full scholarships for single mothers, late-blooming coders, and women with resumes full of gaps, but hearts full of grit. I didn't just want to hire them. I wanted to arm them with skills, confidence, and a network that didn't see them as charity, but as power. I partnered with universities, with shelters, with women's clinics. I got pushback from investors, from branding consultants who told me it was off mission. I reminded them I own the damn mission. And I put my own money down. The first 5 cohorts were funded entirely from my NATO bonus. Not because I needed the PR. Because I needed those women to know someone out there remembered what it was like to be underestimated. Some days I'd walk into the Ember Lab and see them. Women who had been waitresses, caregivers, retail workers, finally sitting behind glowing monitors writing flawless logic. It made everything worth it. The humiliation, the firing, even Clay. Eventually, people started asking me to speak. Podcasts, conferences. One talk at Stanford went viral. The one where I stood in front of a full auditorium and said, "I don't do revenge, I do results." And that line lived its own life. It showed up on posters, mugs, even a tattoo someone showed me once at LAX. At first I laughed, but then I realized it was the truth. I didn't need Clay to fail. I didn't need Garrison systems to collapse. I had become proof that you could be burned alive by the old system and still rise, not in flames, but in full command. So yeah, I built Noventa. But Ember? That was my legacy. Because when you light the way for someone else, you don't just rewrite your story, you multiply it. By the time Forbes called Noventa a quiet empire, we were already past the $4.7 billion valuation mark. I didn't throw a party. I didn't even flinch. Numbers were just numbers. What mattered more was who was calling. And suddenly, it was everyone. Defense contractors that once laughed me out of rooms were now sending gifts and exploratory proposals. VC firms that ignored my pitch deck 2 years ago were now tripping over themselves trying to schedule a coffee. And Clay? Well, he didn't call, but his son did. Brett emailed me a neatly worded invitation to reconnect and explore possible strategic synergies. I didn't respond. Ava forwarded it to spam. It wasn't personal. Okay, maybe a little. But it was principle. I didn't come this far to bend backwards for the same people who once saw me as a liability. They didn't see the nights I slept on a yoga mat under my desk. They didn't care when I couldn't afford health insurance and still coded for 14 hours a day. So no, I wasn't about to circle back so they could attach their brand to my climb. A reporter once asked me what it felt like to finally be welcome to the table. I smiled and said, "I built my own table. Their seats aren't needed." In Chi. Another interview, someone brought up the letter. The one Clay had written when he fired me. The one that said, "Don't attach your name to anything that isn't built to last." I kept that letter. Framed it. So when the reporter asked what I thought of it now, I simply said, "He was right. That's why I waited. And ganten min vau mot tam kau ma hochua bao gio tuong tuong noi." They printed. That quote in bold let them. I never planned to send the letter. I kept it framed on my office wall for years, not out of spite, but as a reminder of how far I'd come, of how small their vision of me once was. But something shifted after that last interview. Maybe it was closure, maybe clarity, or maybe I just wanted to return the energy, not as revenge, just to finish the story. So I took the original letter Clay had typed the day he fired me, the one where he told me not to attach the Alden name, yes, I legally dropped it, to anything that might not last. I slid it into a slim black envelope and added a single photo. A candid snapshot from the Garrison System's 25th anniversary dinner. The shot was taken from outside the ballroom window. Inside, a long, gleaming table. Every seat filled, except one, the one they left empty for appearances. My seat, untouched. I added a note. Handwritten. Simple. I was there, you just didn't see me. Some of us were never invited to the table, but we still remember who looked away. No. Signature. No return address. I had it messengered to Garrison HQ. No tracking, no reply requested. It wasn't for them, really. It was for me, the version of me who walked out of that building years ago with nothing but a drive full of code and a spine made of stubborn, I didn't wait for a reaction. I didn't scroll for gossip. There were no phone calls, no public statements, just silence. The kind I used to fear, now the kind I own. And I didn't look back. I didn't need their apologies. I didn't need validation from people who once measured my worth by how quiet I could be in a room full of men. They'd already said enough, in boardrooms, in emails, in dismissals. And now, I'd said mine. I didn't show up to boast. I showed up to remind them. There are people you tried to bury. And we became the mountain. If Julia's story inspired you, if it made you want to get up and rebuild from nothing, you're not alone. Like this video. If you believe that sometimes, silence is the strongest response. Subscribe to the channel for more stories about resilience, betrayal, and how the underestimated rewrote the rules. And don't forget to drop a comment below, because who knows? You might be the next story we tell.